Hello, and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Arthur, PMW's multimedia editor. Very exciting show for you today, as always, folks. Opening the episode is our premium content editor, Jyoti Rhambai, fresh off her flight back to London from Boston. Jyoti spent the last week out in the US at HubSpot's Inbound Conference 2024. PMW, we are a global brand and we do like to get out and about. Now hitting Boston, Jyoti regales us with her tales from her trip, and it's not all Fenway Park and baseball and exploring downtown and MIT. She does get into the biggest trends in marketing that emerged from those keynotes and presentations and panels, and I won't spoil any, but some will be quite surprising, some less surprising, I imagine, so tune in for that. Following that discussion with Jyoti, I'm joined by Gonca Bubani, the Global Thought Leadership Director for Media at Kantar. Kantar recently released its 2024 Media Reactions Report, which outlines marketers and consumers' preferences for where they put their ads in terms of the platforms, as well as the media channels. We seek to answer the question, is there really freedom of choice in digital advertising when it comes specifically to the platforms you choose to place your ads? So listen on if you want an answer to that, I imagine, very important and compelling question. And who knows, maybe some of you marketers listening will make some adjustments to your ad spend in the future. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Jyoti Rhambai, PMW's premium content editor, back in the studio. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, thanks. It's been a hell of a week, actually.
Yeah, why is that?
I'm just exhausted. That's why.
We should say you've been catching up a little bit with jet lag, I suppose.
Yeah.
PMW, we are a global brand, and this year in particular, we've toured far and wide. We've had feet on the ground in Cannes in the south of France. We've gotten over to the States as well. I was down in Silicon Valley earlier this year, and you have just got back from Boston.
Yes, that's right. I was at Inbound Conference, which is HubSpot's flagship conference for marketers. So there's so many, I would say thousands of people there. It was huge.
Across a couple of days, right? Because I understand you got a little bit of time to explore Boston. You hadn't been there before. I was very jealous of the opportunity. I've seen photos of you at Fenway Park, taking in the sights of downtown as well.
Yeah.
A little bit of social and play and pleasure as well as work.
Yes, and if you've been to any of the events in this industry, I think it's always like that. Even, at the conferences, like it was over 3 days, but every night there was something happening, like I would say like the after party.
We love our glitz and glam in the marketing.
Yeah.
In the marketing world, that's for sure. You don't have to look much further than Cannes to understand that. But yeah, HubSpot's flagship event, Inbound Conference it was called, in Boston, over 3 days. So tell me about it. How was it?
I think, well, it's no exaggeration to say that the theme of the entire event was AI.
Unsurprisingly.
It was just AI this, AI that, and even HubSpot themselves launched their own AI automation platform called Breeze. So that happened on the Wednesday, on the first day. And just a quick summary on that's they're moving towards a one-stop shop platform for marketers. So
they're a CRM platform, essentially.
Yeah, traditionally
HubSpot.
They're a CRM platform that has been aimed at small businesses that want to scale up. And that's sort of where they started, and now they're looking to sort of build that out. And it's also making advertising more accessible to those smaller businesses, which I guess up until now, especially with like some of the traditional media channels, a lot of those have been out of reach for many small to medium businesses, partly because they required big budgets.
cost of new investment. It can be tricky at times, especially when there's so many channels to choose from. You can't really afford to just dip your toes in the water, and a bit of trial and error, really. Your budget's got to work if you're going to maintain it.
And I think generally speaking, the industry is moving that way anyway. So this idea of a one-stop shop for producing a campaign from start to finish. So that's production, strategy, creating the creatives for the different channels, I guess, right through to then measuring the results of the campaign, how it's doing, adapting it. So
it's giving you that data post-campaign as well, so you can look at the outcomes.
And for a small business or even a medium business, you know, if you've got one platform that does it all, that's so cost effective.
Gold, absolute gold.
And I say it's, as an industry, we're moving towards that, is because ITV has also recently launched their very first AI-only ads, and they are for small businesses. Again, I think one was launched in Wales and one was launched in Northern Ireland.
That's right. This was news that came out last week.
Yeah, at the end of last week. So it is interesting to see that. And I spoke to a lot of people there, and there's loads of exhibitors, loads of delegates. A lot of them are from the ad tech, martech world. And the theme, I say AI, but the other theme that I think, and I'm picking this up as I'm speaking to more and more people, is this idea of creative becoming more aligned in performance marketers' roles.
This theme we've been talking about for quite some time now, of performance moving up the funnel. You said while you're out there, you've sort of began to see that more and more in practice.
Yeah, and the phrase they're using is creative performance. That's what it's called. I quite like that phrase, actually, because
brand performance is what's been coined over here, but creative performance works just as well.
Yeah, and it is interesting because for so long in this industry, you have the creative and they sit on their own, it's a silo, and then you have the media agencies, be it social media, performance marketing, planning and buying, and they don't necessarily always work with each other. You do the creative and then you look at where you're going to place the ads, right? So I think it's all changing as everything's becoming so interwoven.
So we're breaking down those silos and forcing the data nerds to work with the creatives. And I suppose the thing with AI is accessibility. And I think that's where it's headed, because it's helping merge, as you say, the worlds of creative and performance, but it's also making new advertising channels accessible to small and medium-sized enterprises. I guess those two themes are really, really interesting ones. Was there anything in particular that stood out from you at the event? Any good keynotes, any good presentations, any names that you want to drop in here for us that we can hear about?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this was a massive event. I think one of my favourite sessions was a keynote from Josh D'Amaro, who's the chairman of Disney Experiences. Now, as a massive Disney fan, this was something that I was actually quite looking forward to. And he was talking about how even within marketing, everything's all about storytelling. If you can tell a good story that's relatable, that's authentic, I know that sometimes is an overused word, but that's what people remember. And chances are, if you remember something, you're going to go back to it, or you're going to do something off the back of that. And the best thing about his keynote was he brought on little robots that came on stage. They sort of resembled Wall-E.
Yeah, I don't know if people listening at home could somehow get up a visual of this, but you showed me a video you took, and it's like little Star Wars droids, where I pointed them out as. They had these little droids come up on stage during the keynote, and they were jumping up and down and doing little jigs and dances and making all their little noise. They were quite cute, really.
They were really cute, and they were those little noises and that. They were reacting to what he was saying and the questions he was asking. But it was a nice little touch. I mean, I don't think you're going to get that anywhere else, and I guess only maybe someone from somewhere like Disney could do that.
A good little bit of fanfare, I suppose,
Disney
and
magic.
Creativity. Disney magic.
Yeah.
That's a good one, Jyoti. Was there anything else that stood out? I know there were some big names in attendance, the likes of Serena Williams, Ryan Reynolds, who's just about as famed in the entrepreneurial landscape as he is as an actor.
They both are. So Serena Williams was all about like investing in the small startup business world, if you like. And Ryan Reynolds he set up his own marketing agency. Interestingly, that was off the back of the first Deadpool film. He said that film was actually made on quite a low budget and it didn't have a marketing budget. So after the last day of filming, he walked off set in the Deadpool costume and refused to give it back, and then used that to then do his own marketing from home. And that's what spurred, I guess, his journey to building his own marketing agency.
It's interesting because both Deadpool films, I think the advertising and the marketing for each of them is something that's particularly memorable among not only marketers but consumers themselves. I think there was a great quote, I can't remember off the top of my head, that you picked out Ryan used in his keynote to do with advertising. He summed it up quite well.
He said something like, marketing is magic, right? And he said that's partly because it enables you to encapsulate different forms of storytelling in so many different ways. And I guess that was probably the other theme, like storytelling. Marketing is all about storytelling. And to your point about the Deadpool campaigns, right? That's got Ryan written all over it. Like, having seen him speak in person now, that's his personality, that's who he is. And I think, like, sometimes if you can get that across, that is more relatable, then people remember it. You're not going to just remember. So this is the other thing he said. I'll get back to my point in a minute, but he called all ads pretty stupid.
That's right. That's the quote you said. All ads are pretty much stupid.
And my point was going to be that sometimes you do get ads that are a bit boring, they're a bit formulaic, and you if you want your ad to stand out, especially in this current landscape, you've got to do something different. You've got to show a bit of personality and make it memorable.
And he certainly does that. I mean, he himself is his own brand at this point. His personality, the persona, and it comes back to that idea of it seeming authentic and real. And it's good to know that when he's speaking at an event, he comes off that way, because often that's when you see people put up a bit of their facade and they get very professional and tend not to have as much fun, show as much personality. Being an actor, I'm not surprised that he won you over. Jyoti, before we round out and move on, is there anything else you wanted to touch on before I let you go?
No, I think that's everything. I guess if you want to know a little bit more, check out my column. I talk a lot more about why now's the time to bridge that gap between performance and creative.
Easy. Jyoti Rhambai, thank you very much for joining in studio today. And right after you get done with listening to this episode of the show, go and check out her column to hear all about Boston.
Cheers. Thanks, Joe.
Gonca Bubani, hello and welcome to the Performance Marketing Unlocked studio. Great to have you here.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. It's another podcast debutante we've got here today. Are you excited to give it a go?
Yeah, never done a podcast before, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Now, we're here today to talk about a couple of different things, but most of it's going to be centered around an interesting research report that Kantar put out, and sort of framing across a question that I've been thinking about in my head for a couple of weeks now, and the report of yours brought that to the top of mind for me again, which is whether or not there really is freedom of choice in advertising, specifically when it comes to the platforms that you advertise on. And that question's come to me because there are some really interesting data and insights from Kantar's latest iteration of its media reactions report, which was the top-ranking digital media platforms for ad preference.
What we look at there is a few different things, because we try to look at the whole media landscape. But looking from a marketer's point of view, it's quite interesting to see where they like putting ads, but where also they end up putting ads.
Now, you surveyed almost 20,000 consumers across 27 markets and 1,000 senior marketers globally as well. The report's broken down the platforms by perceived trustworthiness, as well as which ones are the most innovative. And this is really interesting because I should say, for those listening at home who maybe haven't read, basically the top ranking digital media platforms by preference all dominated by big tech and big social, I think it's fair to say. Among marketers, it's YouTube, Instagram, Google, followed by Netflix, which is new to the top 5.
Correct.
And Spotify. And among consumers, for their preference, it's Amazon and TikTok equal top, followed by Instagram, Google, and Netflix. What do we make of that? What do we make of that in terms of preferential marketing? Is that to say all marketers and consumers are just favoring these specific platforms?
First off, I should say that these rankings are among global brands specifically. So in these rankings, we don't really take into account the local market brands, which we do measure as well. But when we look at the global brands, which are 10 in our study, I would say there is a bit of difference. Yes, Instagram and Google, for example, appear in both lists. But if we look at the number ones for consumers, Amazon and TikTok, they actually don't appear in the top 5 for marketers. So thinking about the consumer favorites not really being anywhere near marketer favorites, I think is quite interesting. And I think that part makes sense because they're coming at it from different angles. Marketers and consumers want different things from ads. And the shared brands, I would say, probably do both of those things very well. So what do they want? If I think about consumers, they just want an uninterrupted experience. If they're enjoying their content on a platform, they don't want to see repetitive ads. They don't want to be bored by ads. That's really as simple as that.
So we're thinking about seamlessly integrating ads onto the platform.
Exactly. But also, there's a bit more to it than that. It's seamlessly integrating, but also, if you think about how it was a few years ago on streaming platforms, for example, we had a lot of frequency issues as well, where like the same ad would play over and over again, even if it's customized to the platform, right? So these things, I think, are being fixed over time, but those are the kind of things that the consumer cares about. Whereas marketers, they care about the consumer preference as well, but they've got so many other things to think about. They have to, first of all, consider the objectives of what they're trying to do for each brand and each campaign, right? They have to think about if they want to increase visibility for their brand, for example, they have to think about how many people are likely to see these ads. So reach would be very important. Alternatively, if you're trying to go to a specific audience, then you have to know that this platform actually caters to them. If you want to just talk to 16 to 20-year-olds, for example. So there are a few things on that, but also the more technical sides of, well, they want to know if the performance actually is what they wanted out of the platform. So they need to be able to measure that. They need to be able to show that all that money they spend, which is a lot in some cases, actually goes somewhere that has an impact. So marketers are coming at it with a bit of a different view, I think. And when we look at these similar brands that they share in their top 5 rankings, like Google and Instagram, it tells me that Google and Instagram fulfill both groups' criteria.
So they're not too intrusive for consumers. They don't really ruin the experience of whatever it is they're doing on Google and Instagram, but then it's also delivering on those metrics and outcomes for marketers. Do you think there's a bit of a discrepancy in terms of how a consumer, we talk about consumer preference of where they're receiving ads, and Amazon sits quite highly up there, but among marketers, Amazon didn't crack that top 5. Does that indicate that maybe consumers are quite happy to see ads on Amazon, but they don't actually take much action on those ads that they see, or those ads are less effective compared to YouTube, Instagram, and Google, which are those top 3 performing ones for marketers?
Yeah.
By preference, which assumes that they perform quite well?
Yeah. I would say no, that's not necessarily an indication of that. Because when we looked at the consumers' perceptions of the ads on Amazon, the top quality that we see is that they think they're relevant and useful. And if you think about what Amazon does as a retail media platform, they're there in that shopping moment where they're choosing, they see relevant ads, so the logic would follow that. That's actually kind of motivates them to do something. What we've looked at, I have then looked at, why that would be. Why would marketers not necessarily preferred advertising.
Because it begs an interesting question then, if that's not the relationship, then why do neither Amazon nor TikTok sit within marketers' preferences?
Yeah, so one of the things we saw is, you mentioned trustworthy ads. We saw that the top brands for marketers tend to be ones they trust more. So that's overall trust. We don't really define it. We just ask, are these ads trustworthy, basically? So what we've seen is it's pretty correlated with what they're receptive to for marketers. So brands like YouTube and Google and Instagram are all trustworthy. And then we kind of wanted to know, what is trust? Like, what else is correlated with this? And this year, one of the questions we asked was about perceived brand safety. Of course, it's a very kind of trendy topic as well.
Very hot topic. We've covered this recently as well on the podcast, across the website. It's coming up a lot, but it's because it's really important.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, I want to say it's an industry-wide problem. It's not just something that's, press wants to make a big deal out of. When we ask the marketers if they think these platforms provide brand safety, of course there are number ones and twos, etc. But the overall levels weren't that high. Number one is Google, so we can talk about that in detail, but 39% of marketers think it provides brand safety, so that's number one. So I think as an industry, there needs to be an action towards that.
Number one is 39% of marketers, so marketers essentially don't have a whole heap of faith in the platforms that they're advertising.
Exactly. But what we saw is those number ones and twos in brand safety are also number ones and twos in trust overall, and then in turn in preference. What brings about those trusts, and other than things like brand safety, is likely things like how established they are, so they can provide these structures of both, buying and selling, etc., but also measurement, so they can tell themselves, their higher ups or their clients, okay, yeah, actually this campaign worked. This campaign that I put on Google or Instagram worked.
Outcomes probably go a long way to determining faith and trust in a platform.
Exactly. And they have been around for so long. One of the things actually that I've noticed this year, we've looked at how the media landscape changed over the past decade or so. And about 10, 11 years ago, people were quite against seeing digital ads almost on any platform. They just didn't welcome them. Whereas now the preference overall for ads have gone up, so people are more positive towards ads in general, but that's because mostly digital ads have caught up to the traditional broadcast, etc. ads. And that tells me two things. It's one, that people are getting used to them, of course, learning about what they are, but also marketers are probably learning to execute them better. So the more established platforms are likely going to know their formats and how it works and how they can help their partners with those better. So apart from brand safety, all those concerns are going to have an impact too. Having said that, this is sort of like, what we measure here is that preference, right? As essentially ad equity, sort of like a long-term, whether you're going to actually keep spending.
Yeah, so it's preference of where they like to place ads. It's not ad spend itself.
No, but there is also the short term of like where they spend, where they want to spend. And interestingly, Amazon and TikTok are high on that list.
Okay,
both
I
of
see.
them. Yeah.
So they may not prefer to spend there, but it's where they're putting quite a bit of their
money. So more than half the marketers are saying they want to increase their spend in TikTok and Amazon and YouTube, their favorite, next year. And that has been the case for the past 5 years. I've seen TikTok quite high in the lists always, for example.
So I was going to ask, from your opinion, do you think marketers need to be listening to consumers more, particularly on the brand safety and suitability point? I imagine, and I'm just inferring here, that platforms consumers prefer to see their ads on, that probably mitigates a little bit of the risk of placing ads on those platforms. At least you know that it's a preferred platform for consumers to receive those ads. does that make them a little bit more suitable and brand suitable for marketers to place ads there?
Definitely. So it should absolutely be one of the concerns. It should be one of the factors when you're making your media plans. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to think about your objectives. So you have to think about whether actually enough people are going to see it. It might be a very niche platform that people are actually okay seeing their ads on, right? Because two things. One, we've noticed that brands' own equity doesn't correlate to their ad equity.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you could be like a very well-loved brand, but the advertising maybe doesn't really work on your platform, maybe because of ad load. You're so popular that you have too much advertising, etc. Another thing is, we did validate the metrics. So we looked at whether these campaigns that you put on these platforms, whether it matters if people are receptive to them, or is it just like they say they are, but it doesn't really have too much of an impact. But actually, yes, if people are receptive to seeing an advertising on a platform, it's 7 times more likely to have a brand impact.
Wow. 'Cause people don't always do as they say, I suppose.
No, exactly.
Do as I do, not as I say. Often the consumer behaves that way. So that's interesting. 7 times more likely is massive.
Yeah, and so you have to consider whether people like seeing ads there, and also that would be a part of like if there is usership, if people are, going to that platform, you don't want to miss out on the reach as well. So that's kind of like, again, a mixed reasoning there for why you would use them. But yeah, it's absolutely needs to be one of the concerns. And I think with brands, it's more obvious because, like I said, even if marketers don't necessarily trust them fully, they do spend because they know consumers are there. It might be a bit different when it comes to like actual like overall channels, when we look at the channels themselves or formats. There, the difference seems even bigger between marketers and consumers.
We'll get into the preferences by media channels a little later in the episode. I wanted to touch on one interesting sort of point of data, and on this graphic that refers to attention and how much attention marketers and consumers are paying to a platform based on trustworthiness and innovation, TikTok's level of innovation is extremely high in terms of that metric that's defined within the research, far surpassing Netflix, which sits second in terms of innovation. Then you've got YouTube, Instagram, and Amazon. So what's so innovative about TikTok? That isn't immediately obvious to me, I suppose, because you've got, it's dominating the short form market, but it's not the only player in the short form market. YouTube's there, Instagram's there with Reels as well, even Facebook's there. So you've got all these players, barring probably Google, that are operating in that short form space. So what's so innovative about TikTok?
So first off, we need to look at it from a few years back. But 5 years ago, we started this, and TikTok was number one back then too. Number one for the first 2 years.
Half a decade ago, it was already number one.
Yes.
Wow.
So a part of that is coming from what I was earlier talking about. If you're a smaller brand, you probably don't have as many ads there, so people are just coming to enjoy your content. So here and there, a few ads don't bother them too much. But if you think about it, TikTok also did lead on some of these kind of the idea of having these more authentic ads. Yes, we've been talking about customizing for platform for years and years, but TikTok specifically needed it to such a high degree because it needed to be less polished. It needed to feel really like and TikTok really kind of emphasized that themselves as well. They push their partners to have the same sort of content that their users create as advertising.
Comes back to that sort of seamless integration a little bit.
And I think for years and years we've said it, but and marketers have learned on other platforms as well, but we have also seen years of putting TV ads directly on YouTube, etc. And people still do that. They shoot it for the TV, cut it down to a few shorter length, and then put it on. But that might not be the only reason why it doesn't fit YouTube. Whereas TikTok ads coming from that more kind of almost day-to-day life sort of
it's a bit more raw.
Exactly. So
unfiltered, everyone likes to say. That's the buzzword.
And yes, exactly. And TikTok pushing that is important for the partner to push it with their own partners as well. I think that started it. And over the years, they have been distinctly the most innovative among marketers for sure. And they have been one of the most innovative among consumers as well. One thing I would say is, even though there is a big difference between number 1 and 2 in terms of the innovation perception, TikTok's innovation has been going down as well. So when we look at it, trend wise. So I would put it down to initially being the leader.
It's a lot more established, isn't it? It's hard to innovate as a leader, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're established within, you dominate already in that
Exactly.
space.
And I think another thing is the content is everything is user created, that probably helps a bit with the culture changing. So the ads having to adapt to that, it kind of keeps up with the times. If you think about how TikTok works as a platform, it's really like been one of the leaders of engaging the community as creators.
It's a leader in the trend space, that's for sure.
For sure. Yeah. And things like, and this is sort of irrelevant, but I found it very interesting, that humor has always been one of the key creative elements that people were receptive to. And for Gen Z, it's actually good music. So I think, TikTok, that's a huge element for TikTok as well. And people can...
There are songs that become famous as the TikTok
exactly.
songs. So they're not produced for TikTok, but that's how they have a big come up and
exactly.
a listenership.
So normal people are able to contribute to culture through that. And advertising on the platform being similar likely contributes to that whole holistic feeling of interaction between marketing world and people.
Now, on this point on innovation, I think it's worth briefly touching on this. We ran a story on it a couple of weeks ago, but X is not high in the innovation preference, and it is also not particularly high in the preference in terms of trustworthiness. Now, there's been a big reported pullback of advertiser investment, and that also is reflected in terms of advertiser preferences, and I'd assume it's not particularly high amongst consumers either, although I don't actually know.
So that's actually pretty funny. To your point, among marketers, in every metric, they have been dropping
down.
And
is that since the Musk takeover?
No, it preceded that, but it has definitely gotten faster in the recent couple of years. But yes, back then, Twitter's the preference was not the highest either. It was already going down a bit, and I think that was what prompted Musk to purchase Twitter anyways in the first place. But yes, what we see is their perception of trust, innovation, whether X ads can deliver attention, receptivity, everything is down. Everything is towards the bottom of the list. And the biggest thing there was, we ask marketers where they're planning to increase their spend in the next year, and net minus 26% said they weren't going to. So that's big. That's the biggest number we've seen in media reactions in history. That's huge, and in recent times we've seen some more press about it. They're always in media, but
don't I know it?
But yeah, I there is a bit of blaming external institutions, partners, etc. going on. But I think it's not really external. It's something that's been there for a while.
We alluded to it. What about among consumers?
Yes, so that's the interesting part, because pullback means less ads, so consumers are actually happy about that. So yes, since 2022, consumers' preference for X has actually increased significantly.
Of course, right, because there's less ads inhibiting the experience, I suppose, and those that are still with X, I'd say, are very much X stands if you've lasted through all the turbulence and are still an active and avid user. That's interesting. Gonca, I wanted to bring this back to that initial question we posed at the start of the episode of, is there really freedom of choice in advertising when it comes to the platforms you choose to advertise with? Now, you've enlightened me on the data here, and I know we're talking about global brands and these bigger brands on these bigger 10 platforms, but there's a trial going on in the US at the moment with the Department of Justice is asserting that Google has an ad tech monopoly after Google was found to have a search monopoly. And among these sort of dominant platforms for preference, I said it last week, I think maybe there's a little bit of an oligopoly emerging. You know, there's a few players dominating the space. Whether or not that's a monopoly, that's not for me to determine. But I think asserting that there might be an oligopoly could be fair. Do businesses, particularly when they increase in size, do they just have to get involved on these channels? Is it a complete necessity? And then that begs the question, is there freedom of choice for where brands place their ads and the platforms they place their ads on?
Yeah, very good question. And I think there is, I mean, when you look at any media plan, there is very little doubt that, most of at least the digital spend, which now exceeds that of TV for years, goes to these big players. There's no doubt about that. Whether a brand can stay away from them, theoretically they could.
That's the thing, is freedom of choice in that you don't have to spend with these platforms, but if you don't, good luck.
So that's the thing, actually. Maybe there is a bit of need for understanding of the media landscape at a deeper level, because one of the things we always say is that you can actually do anything on any platform. You just need to know how to use that platform. The problem is marketers don't always have time. They don't always have the money to test and learn. When they do, it works. We've seen it, with the media landscape changes over the years. So technically, you don't necessarily need YouTube to deliver your online video exposure. Do people actually not do it? No, most of the time we see, even if we don't see one of them, two of them, we see the other two in the media plans, especially for big brands that can afford that. But there's also the whole idea of digital channels being more affordable. They are more cost effective compared to something like broadcast TV. So of course now we also know that smaller brands can also use them. So there is absolutely, they're there. One thing we've actually looked at is, I mentioned that globally we measure these 10 brands, but we go to 27 markets. So in each market, we also measure local brands. So overall, we measure about 400 brands globally. And that list in each market comes from what we see in media plans. So yes, local brands are still around. They are still being on media plans, and they still take some of the share of voice. But I would also add that we talked about whether marketers are listening to consumers. If they some of them do to a degree, they maybe should do more, because what we see in these preference rankings among consumers is that local brands we see them as number ones, top fives, etc. everywhere. And if you look at the biggest media market, US, the number one has never been one of these global brands there.
Wow.
It's the Sears Wall Street Journal.
I see, right.
Yeah.
So it brings to light maybe there's scope to pivot away from these big players, but it's going to take a gutsy brand to do it and do it successfully, and it becomes more difficult the more global a brand is.
Yeah, and if we think about the trial that's ongoing, if it ends up that Google has to divest some parts of the business,
sell off a little bit of its ad tech,
it would absolutely impact the media landscape to a degree. But I think at least at the first stage, it would be more about Google's ad revenue rather than other people not using them. Because if you think about actually placing ads on Google, all these trials have been going on. The search monopoly has gone on before as well, and the trust levels, etc., they're still pretty high for Google among marketers. They still prefer them. Like I said, brand safety number 1 and 2 are Google and YouTube.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say the actual placement of ads on Google would change, but their ad revenue is likely going to be impacted, of course. Yeah.
Everyone speaking about this has said similar things on the short-term consequences, but the long-term picture is what the DOJ and the Competition Markets Authority in the UK has also said, that they're investigating this idea of an ad tech monopoly, And it's a view of long-term competition, I
Yeah.
suppose, and maintaining a healthy ecosystem in digital advertising into the future. Because I think you're right, in the short term, regardless of the outcome, it's just the Google's bottom line taking a little bit of a hit in the short term. But in the long term, who knows what happens? I think there's scope for it to be a good thing for competition. Certainly.
Absolutely, because if the smaller players, they're not always small, but smaller players
Comparatively.
do get more space over time. A media landscape is always dynamic. It always changes. Like I was talking about how people were so against digital advertising just 10 years ago. The numbers were really stark. Like consumers literally did not want minus 45% receptivity for formats like mid-roll.
Worse than X.
Yeah. So yes, they really didn't want to see digital ads, but now it's all normal. So yeah, things change. And if you think about even the composition of the people who are exposed to advertising on digital now, it's everyone. Whereas 10 years ago, it wasn't everyone. You had to actually find people who use tablets and mobile phones to survey. So yeah, media landscape is always dynamic.
It's interesting, and that moves me to the next point of discussion. And I wanted to touch on this just briefly before we move to the infamous Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast Resell Me a Pen Challenge, is the top-ranking media channels by preference, and the fact that the disparity between consumers and marketers was even greater. So in terms of preference among marketers for media channels, digital out-of-home is number one, followed by sponsored events, online video ads, out-of-home ads, and e-commerce ads. Whereas for consumers, their number one preference is point of sales, followed by cinema ads. Who doesn't love a cinema ad? Sponsored events, newspaper ads, and out-of-home ads. So pretty drastically different when you think about it.
Yeah. And it's again coming from that place of what sort of experience they want, because marketers want prominent ads, they want exposure, they want people to, they want to make sure people actually pay attention. But if you think about cinema ads, people genuinely enjoy sitting there and watching them because they're an immersive experience. Or point of sale ads, when you go to a store, is actually useful. There might be some sort of promotion, or it's the relevant moment of decision. So what's interesting there is actually marketers' top 5 changes every year. They want to be on the cutting edge of technology, and they want to be on the cutting edge of the culture. They are more experimental, maybe not with platforms, but with the general kind of formats and channels they want to use. They're okay with that. And what we've seen is for digital out of home, which is their number one, they find it incredibly innovative. They trust it. They think it gets attention. So it's like on all fronts, they really like it. And, you know, if you think about it yourself from experience, it's also a place that's uncluttered. You can control the environment, no brand safety issues. And you can simply say something in an innovative way. We've seen digital out-of-home displays across different countries. Asia does really exciting things sometimes. Yeah, I think that's kind of excites them. These are the kind of channels that excite marketers.
It's a perfect example. At the top of the episode, my colleague Jyoti Rhambai joined me. We spoke about the merge happening between performance marketing and creative. And I think digital out-of-home epitomizes that in the sense that it brings you sort of out-of-home ads and it makes them a little bit more measurable, but it maintains that scope for creativity. And as you said, it's ticking a lot of the modern boxes for marketers, which is brand safety, brand suitability, it's control, the environment, and it's one that's pretty decluttered too. So it doesn't surprise me when you look at that. The other thing it doesn't surprise me with as well is on the consumer side, point of sales ads being their top preference, that opens the door a little bit to the emergence of retail media, and digital out of home is sort of entering that retail media space a little bit. And retail media's strength is it can meet consumers at different points across the purchase funnel. So this is one we're looking at this data where I give marketers a little bit more credit for their creativity and their flexibility. And you said that they've been quite happy to embrace innovation on this front. And it's interesting to see why, but I certainly do give them credit for that. Gonca, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to move on to our Resell Me a Pen challenge. Do you want to enlighten me before I start the stopwatch as to what it is, what outdated product or service you're going to resell to me today?
Yes, it's arcades.
Arcades. Amazing. This is one that I just missed. I was a late 90s kid, and I think arcades, sort of having my adolescence through the 2000s, I just missed the boat on arcades. But it's one that I look back at, particularly I love Stranger Things and those movies and TV shows from the 70s and the 80s. It looked like a real social hub. Not saying I'm sold already. I'll put you on the clock now, Gonca. 60 seconds. I'll give you warnings at 10 seconds and 5 seconds.
Okay.
Starting now.
So when I was a kid, I already had a console at home and a PC, but going to an arcade was always a different experience. It was always so exciting, and it didn't really replace that. And especially nowadays, if you think about the trend towards digital detoxing and people wanting to keep their kids out of, outside and out of digital influences sometimes, and with the increasing influence of communities, even in online gaming, if you think about it, having a physical place to actually have that community and have that clout that you can get from the leaderboards that are now in multiple MMOs and multiplayer games online, you can have that experience in person, and also you can get the benefit of nostalgia for older people as well.
Terrific. 60 seconds on the dot. You did well of rounding that out quickly. Maybe I should start warning people a little earlier so they can frame their pitches. But I like putting
a lot more to say.
Diamonds made under pressure, and I like putting people under pressure. Yeah. Gonca, I think that was really good, and it, if anything, just makes me jealous at the fact that there's so many people that got to experience such a fun little social hub, and it scratches that itch of competition, whereas in the 2000s it was very much the days of sitting at home playing Grand Theft Audio online and you're talking to your friends through headsets, which never quite appealed to me as much. But maybe it's one that could have a comeback in arcade. I think post-pandemic there's this sort of cry out for people to get back out into the world and socialising with one another, and who knows, it's one I want to see. So let's cross our fingers and hope for the future.
Yes, I'll be definitely going.
Gonca, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
And that concludes this episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. Big thank you to our premium content editor, Jyoti Rhambai, for opening the episode with me and regaling us with her tales from Boston out there at HubSpot's Inbound Conference 2024. Some interesting insights there. The trends regarding AI, perhaps not so surprising, but the applications and use cases are ever relevant, as well as that ongoing merge between creative and brand and performance marketing. Everything is just moving up the funnel, it seems. Also, a big thank you to Gonca Bubani, who did an amazing job for her first ever podcast episode. She speaks so well, very impressive. Also, an all-time great Resell Me a Pen challenge, if you ask me. But the crux of that discussion was equally as insightful and enjoyable on all things the media landscape and where ads are not only being placed, but where consumers and marketers want to place them. Those preferences are really, really important, and I think she did a good job of enlightening us as to the answer to that big question of whether or not there really is freedom of choice in digital advertising, or is it an oligopoly, or as some might argue, even a monopoly? Who knows? But before I let you go, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you, the loyal listener, for tuning in each and every fortnight as you do. Don't forget, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're so inclined, leave us a positive rating and review. We'll be back, as always, in a fortnight's time with another episode of the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. In the meantime, have an amazing week, and you'll be hearing from me again shortly. Bye for now.